How you doing?
Mr. Tinker, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. So how are you?
I heard that.
Good.
Excellent. Morning.
Good morning. So there's a bunch of stuff I want to chat about on scaling and mobile and all of this. But there is a small chance that fewer people know they've used MobileIron than Box, right? Even though just as many people may use them. So do you want to give us just 60 seconds of, or as many seconds as you want on the company? Then we can go back in time a little bit.
Appreciate it. So good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Tinker, the CEO at MobileIron. MobileIron is an enterprise-focused security and management company that provides security and management for mobile apps, mobile data, and mobile content in the enterprise. The real core problem we challenge we solve is if you look at smartphones and tablets are exploding into the enterprise. People want to choose their device, get their applications, get their content, and do it with a great user experience. That's where we come in. We sell a platform to those companies that help them do that, and we have a large ecosystem of application and content players around us that join in that success. The company is 7 years old. We were founded in 2007, and the news is we recently went public on NASDAQ earlier this year.
That's good. Yeah. So good. So Bob, you didn't actually found MobileIron when you were still a sophomore in college, I think, like Aaron or whatever the time is, right? Before that, among other things, right? You were with Airspace, which had a great exit, right? In fact, yes. Back in the day, that was $400 million in like 05, right? I mean, we fell out of our chairs back then, right? That was like, yeah, it seemed like a lot of money.
Yeah, it was $450 million.
$450 million. I mean, we were like, wow, right? People we were talking about it on the streets of downtown Palo Alto, I remember, right?
Yeah, no, it is actually interesting to think back that, this is my third lap around the track. The first one was a voice over IP company in 1998 that really didn't get off the ground. It was too early. Second was Airspace, which, in 2005, we went from 0 to about $80 million a year, right in the gut of the post-dot-com depression. And we were one of the first large exits at Airspace, sort of before the technology market turned around in 05. So after spending 3 years at Cisco, came to start MobileIron, and 7 years later, here we are.
So so tell me, so you do that. You joined MobileIron, founder, CEO. What are any particular learnings from Airspace and others that you wanted to do better this time, right? I mean, we've got founders and CEOs here. What did you set out to do better?
Well, let's see. I think, there are many things that actually my last company did really well, right? Yeah. I mean, going from 0 to $80 million in 3 years. Built a good product, built a quick go-to-market, was able to ramp the business quickly. If I look at the things that I think we did differently, one of the challenges we had in my last company, and I think this is sort of good advice as you think about your businesses, is that Airspace solved a big challenge, which was enterprise Wi-Fi. But the problem was sort of once we cracked that big rock, it was really sort of a lot of little pebbles left. There wasn't sort of a next big problem to go solve.
Yep.
And one of the things I love about MobileIron and the enterprise mobility market and the transition to mobile and cloud is that there are a lot of big rocks to go crack.
Yeah.
And there is no shortage of big challenges to solve, big problems to crack, and frankly, great businesses to build. And I think picking a space where you feel like there's not just one problem to solve, but actually a sequence of problems to solve is a way to build a really sustaining business.
Yeah. So that is interesting. I want to talk about that, but let's just go back a little bit in time because there's so many interesting things about MobileIron in terms of timing and history. So the sort of lay version of the MobileIron story is, what's after BlackBerry, right? How do we take the security
That's where it started, yeah.
Right, of BlackBerry and do that on these emerging mobile devices like these iPhone things, these Android devices, right? So obviously the right vision, right? That was a good one. A lot of money has left BlackBerry and gone to MobileIron. But you start off and there's it's very interesting. But I mean, Aaron and I, we didn't get to competition, right? And
Sure.
Box has a lot of notional competition, a lot of competition in the press, but I'm going to argue MobileIron is much more competitive in some ways than Box, right? And I could be wrong, and Aaron can challenge me. Especially in the beginning, you've got so many competition, and some of your competitors got so big, right? what have you learned through that process, right?
That was true in the beginning, but it's not so true anymore.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a sense for sort of what happens. And again, going back to this thesis that if you're in a market where there's a sequence of hard problems to solve, it creates multiple opportunities to differentiate over time. And if you look at the very beginning of enterprise mobility, it was basically like, hey, look, people just want their iPhones and get their email, right? And that was sort of phase one. And in the early days of the market, yeah, there were a lot of people sort of jumping in, trying to figure it out. What was different about us, and this is a huge advantage for companies that are focused, is we were focused on solving this problem. We didn't used to do anything else. We purpose-built the company and the architecture to go do that. But then the market evolved. It was no longer just about email. It was about apps and content and access to services. And all of a sudden, you know, the original platform we built was there to take advantage of that much bigger problem. So as a result, as the requirements of customers got more sophisticated and larger, the competitive landscape has actually narrowed. So we've seen our competitive landscape go from, you know, a large number of players back in, 2008 to 2010 to 4 earlier this year. And I would argue now it's really 2 that can deliver sort of the full solution that's required. And that again goes back to this thesis that in a big market growing fast with hard problems to solve, you can build a real sustaining business.
Yeah, I just add on to that, kind of knowing Bob's space pretty well, and kind of ours, like the best thing that tends to happen is a big incumbent like an IBM buys one of your competitors.
Oh, yeah, it's a gift.
That just whittled down the field.
Especially in a mobile and cloud world, it just, their
I was
gear
going to bring that
ratios
up,
are
but
wrong.
decided to leave it be. But that, more times than not, that's a boon, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish for that for Christmas every year.
Yeah. Well, you know, digging on that more, I think there's a bigger theme. All of us, maybe not you, Bob and Aaron, but all of us, most of us founders, I think we worry too much about competition, and maybe we think about it too tactically sometimes. Maybe, but what do you think about that, Bob? How much time should we spend agonizing over press releases and competition and the big deal, right?
You know, the most important thing is to pick the right market and focus on what the problem is you want to solve.
Yeah.
And if you do a really good job at that and build a great business, the competition will take care of itself. You know, what I find is that particularly in market inflections like the one we're in right now, those that are focused tend to win in the long run. And particularly when you're seeing a shift from sort of the old PC era that changed every 5 to 7 years to the new mobile and cloud era that changes every 6 to 7 months. Building your company with the right gear ratio to be able to move at that speed is actually a long-term sustainable competitive advantage that, you know, frankly, you can look at a lot of the legacy players, and we don't call them competitors or incumbents. We look at them as legacy players.
Yeah.
Right? They're coming from the old world trying to move into the new world, whereas if you're purpose-built for the new world, you have a huge competitive advantage. So in that case, we don't obsess about the competition that much. Clearly, you have to pay attention to it. You want to learn from it. It matters a lot. But meeting customer needs, solving a hard problem, building a good business, the rest of it will take care of itself.
Yeah. Question. So I think most of us here, even if we're muchly mobile, right? We're not as mobile as MobileIron, right? Even Box, I think, isn't 100. I mean, Box is maybe 70% mobile, but it comes from a desktop root and a lot. And the data entry side of Box is often on a desktop, the hardcore stuff, right? True. Bob, you're mobile enterprise, right?
Mobile first, all the way.
Mobile first, right? So, a couple of questions if people are thinking about it. One I don't know the answer to are economics, right? So the thing about a company like Box is it's kind of easy. There's certain buckets for traditional SaaS companies. Salesforce is like $200 a month.
Right.
There's apps that are like 80. There's 20, and then there's 5. Like, how do you figure out pricing and economics in pure mobile enterprise? Is there any? Because there's not as many comps, right?
Yeah, you know, I think the answer to that one is it depends. It depends on what your product and service is.
Yeah.
I think one of the early challenges the mobile industry had is that mobile was widely viewed as an appendage of something else.
Exactly, right? So I don't want to pay anything for an appendage, right? A dollar,
exactly.
Right?
But here's what's happening that I think is sort of signifies the sea change that we're all part of right now, is that the world is inverting where the primary computing platform that users are using to access their services and get their work done is shifting to both mobile and cloud. And as a result, mobile becoming the primary computing platform, mobile's becoming core, mobile's becoming strategic. If you look at, we have nearly 500 of the Global 2000 as customers, right? And I was on the phone talking to the CIO of a large natural resources company. And 3 years ago when we started working with them, mobile was tactical. It's like, all right, how do I get people iPhones and iPads and sort of let them do basic stuff?
Yep.
But now their core business applications, their ERP, their content, their CRM, their core DNA for how they get their jobs done in their business is actually wired into mobile. So the CIO said something interesting, which is that mobile has now become one of my 5 priority 1 IT infrastructure services. And at that point, the value proposition changes. So I think, to get to pricing, it depends on what it is you're doing. But I think we're all in the midst of this transition where mobile is going from sort of appendage to core.
Yeah.
And the value in the entire market, whether it's market cap of public companies, software revenue value from traditional legacy companies, is all migrating to those that are part of this next generation IT stack that's being built right now.
Yeah. No, and do you think, and I'd love to get Aaron's thoughts too, if you have an entrepreneur here that's truly mobile first, right? Do you think there are do you think it is easy to charge $20 a month or $40 a month and for truly a mobile enterprise workflow application? Do you think the markets are there yet?
At that price level, not yet.
Yeah.
But you can see it coming. Yeah. Because what happens is the distinction between what was mobile and what was not mobile starts to go away, and it just becomes what's the best way to do what you're doing. Yeah. And at that point, the price is the price.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And Aaron, if it's in the S1, what's the average per seat price of box these days? Is it disclosed?
We do not disclose the average, but it is high for some, low for others.
Yeah.
What I would say.
Wow, that was super helpful.
Do you think? I'm gonna
trade on that information.
I don't want to harp on it I think the ACV was disclosed, but it's in the traditional range of an application of its peer set, right?
It's traditional.
Yeah. Can you charge $20 a month for box or whatever it is for mobile only?
Well, yeah. I mean, so just to be less coy, we see some customers that at massive scale, maybe at $5 or $10 a seat. And then some customers who are super regulated and they have very specific strict workflows might be $35 per seat on a monthly basis. Yeah. And the only other thing is that it's, your question is sort of dependent on knowing the application. If you are building an oil rig management application for the iPad, you could probably charge $1,000 a seat.
That's for sure.
Per month.
Yep.
It's all depending on how mission critical is the use case and what is the value you're driving in the business because of that.
Yeah, let me ask a related question on economics. So, and Aaron and I, before Bob, we were talking a little bit about services revenue, right? And I wish I charged more services revenue. We were talking about that. So
professional services
what's
revenue?
That?
Or
and enterprise deals.
Services.
Just getting the 20% of the deal in services and not charging for it or not optimizing that is sort of leaving money and a relationship potentially on the table, right? So for MobileIron, to me, maybe it's interesting in that you've got a mix, at least historically, of recurring and non-recurring revenue, right?
Yes.
So a couple questions. First of all, does it matter? You guys have both done roadshows in the last 14 months talking about these, but revenue is revenue at some level, right?
Yeah,
so how do you think about
does
this,
it
right?
matter? That's sort of a weird question to answer.
Right?
So let me sort of maybe share
how we think about it.
How do you
think about recurring versus non-recurring? Right?
So the most important thing when you're building a company is to look at what it is you're selling and how customers are going to buy it.
Yeah.
Arguing with customers about how they're going to buy what you sell is not a great way to start your sales process. So we very early on in the days of MobileIron had a very practical sales philosophy. Yeah. It was sell to customers how they want to buy. And it depends what industry you're in. If you're in an app world, it's a lot easier to start and say, look, go 100% recurring out of the gate. Yep. But what we do is fundamental infrastructure. Like we are providing enterprise security and management infrastructure for apps, content, and devices in the enterprise. And when you're in the infrastructure business, particularly setting to the large enterprise, the practical world was a lot of the large Global 2000s were still living in a perpetual license world, and a lot of the mid-sized enterprise were happy going recurring and SaaS and subscription.
Yep.
And so we had a choice. Do we force our customers to go one way or the other, or do we sell to them how they want to buy? And in an early stage market where winning the customers and the value of that customer over time is so big,
Yes.
arguing about how they want to buy doesn't make sense. So we have been operating in a mixed model. And I think, things come in and out of fashion over time. My prediction is over time, sort of mixed models will become a little more in fashion just because it sort of reflects reality of how customers buy.
Yeah.
It is a little more complicated, no doubt. It does have an interesting side effect, though, which is that when you have a mixed model, it creates great discipline in your sales and forecasting organization because you have to get really good at forecasting. And if you look at one of the things about building a great business, it's not just about knowing where your business is right now, but being able to get a sense for where your business is going to be 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now.
Yep.
And forecasting, building that discipline into your company, no matter what business it is, matters a lot. So I've actually found one of my sort of key pieces of advice for companies out there that do have a mixed model because of how customers buy what they do. You just need to make sure you're good at forecasting.
Yeah. Yeah, I just, in my time at Adobe and after, Adobe went from basically downloaded software to a recurring revenue model, and I think the stock price has essentially tripled while the revenues have been essentially consistent. So to me, that's an extreme example that says, at least in some cases, right, Wall Street is in love with the recurring revenue, right?
They are,
and
but
yet
it's interesting.
At some
you gotta
level,
pull
it's
it
the
apart.
same thing, right?
They
no
love
difference.
recurring revenue, but it's interesting. What they really care about is billings,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Which is actually, what are you selling? Revenue is sort of an after effect of the accounting process.
Yep.
The important thing to zero in on is actually what are customers buying, what are they committing to, what are they billing.
Yep.
The revenue sort of flows out over time, and I think that's where the industry is getting smarter in terms of understanding valuations of businesses and companies, is actually to understand the true value of what's being sold, not necessarily about how it gets recognized.
Yeah. Let me ask you, especially since I've got Aaron here, so I could have this wrong, but I think as MobileIron evolved its rocks and moved more into applications, Box was a pretty important one, wasn't it? I think there was a lot of customer demand.
Actually, we do
right?
a lot of joint deals with
It's a high one,
Aaron
right?
and Box.
So,
absolutely.
So what are from both your perspectives, but Bob, what are the learnings from that in terms of partnering and any learnings from the team? Since we've got both of you, it's interesting, right?
Well, the business we're in is fundamentally a platform business. Providing that security and management platform for the enterprise for their devices, their apps, and their content.
Yep.
Some of the applications are going to be apps that customers build themselves, and that's sort of the classic model of being able to enable those with security and management. But increasingly in the new mobile and cloud world, customers are buying apps from third parties and cloud services, and Box is a great example of that. So we started working with Box in the very early days and became ecosystem partners where we did technology integration between our two organizations. So my advice in terms of building an ecosystem is, number one, it has to have real technical value, that the customers actually get sort of some joint value out of whatever you're doing together. In our case, the value proposition is that we help check the box for IT security really quickly for our application partners so they can increase their deal size faster and quicker inside enterprise companies.
Yeah.
The value proposition to us, it actually makes our platform more valuable. And that's sort of the definition of any type of ecosystem relationship, is it's got to be symbiotic. Both partners have to see an increase in deals, leads, or stickiness by working together.
And do you guys, did you end up bringing each other into deals? I mean, both companies are at scale,
yes.
right? So it's not like MobileIron customers haven't heard of MobileIron or they haven't heard of Box, right? So do the customers already know they want Box and MobileIron, or do you?
It depends. Sometimes we find deals and they're like, hey, we're looking for mobile content collaboration
Have you ever heard of this Box product?
And we're like, hey, Box, one of our ecosystem partners, slots right in, and
Yeah.
vice versa. One of the things that happens when customers start deploying Box is mobile and mobile data and mobile security becomes more important.
Yeah.
So, hey, do you guys know MobileIron? And yeah, our sales teams know each other really well. That's sort of the last thing that I would leave in terms of ecosystem partners, is a lot of times those things get done at sort of what I call the Barney Deal stage, which like, everybody
Say that
shakes
again, the Barney?
a Barney deal.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we love you, you love
Yeah.
us, let's all hug.
Yep.
I may be dating myself there. The real meat on the bone in any type of ecosystem partnership is what actually happens in the field between the sales teams. That's really the measure of a successful partnership.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually say that the mobile especially did this, but I think cloud has plenty more opportunity where if you think about this whole industry from a customer standpoint, there's just so much going on. Like there's just so many things, so many applications, so many new devices, and the more that you can begin to create solutions for customers virtually, in the case of multiple companies coming together to deliver something, often the easier it is for that customer to consume any one of the parts. And so it truly is synergistic in the sense of you wouldn't be getting deals if the customer wasn't able to actually have that holistic problem being solved. And so that's going to be some mix of Apple, MobileIron, and Box kind of coming in and delivering a mobility set of capabilities for the enterprise. So and everybody has their version of that because there's always an adjacency that is next to your application that you can partner with that you're not going to get into their space and vice versa, and you can actually, you have just a kind of a fairly straightforward working relationship to go sell to customers.
Yeah, this is a meta trend that I think is sort of a great definitional difference between the old world of enterprise technology and the new world of enterprise technology. The old world of enterprise technology is a large enterprise would basically buy a closed stack from a single vendor. I'm going to buy everything from them. If you look at the new mobile and cloud world, it's about choice. Choice of operating system, iOS, Android, Windows. Choice of application from large vendor, small vendor. Choice of content storage in the cloud or on-prem. It's really about choice and
we'd prefer that
together.
Layer didn't have a choice.
Yeah, I did.
We're working on it.
Yeah. You're working on that. Yeah, but if there still is a choice.
Yes.
But in this new world of choice, the whole model for security, management, collaboration, application integration is going to be different. And it's actually, in some ways, unleashes a tremendous amount of innovation for IT organizations to be able to adopt, but it's also confusing and requires a lot of other pieces to come together. That's why sort of the old world of the closed stack is dying, sort of the traditional PC economy is dying, and sort of this new mobile and cloud stack is evolving. We're actually all part of a transition where fundamentally there's an entirely new enterprise IT stack being built right now, and the emerging leaders of this next generation enterprise IT industry, hopefully some of you are in the room right now, and I think that's a great opportunity for us all.
Yeah. Let me take the partner thing just down to a tactical level, because I know people think about this stuff all the time. One real low-level question, then I'll go up a level. Does spiffs work?
Spiffs.
Well, Box and MobileIron have joint
the
customers. Does comping the Box reps or the MobileIron reps and selling? Because everyone wants to do a spiff, right? What if I could just spiff Box and they'd send me all their deals, right? Or spiff MobileIron sales team, right?
So, do you want to answer it?
Yeah.
I think it helps a little bit in the beginning. Like if you look at the beginning, right, if you're a salesperson inside an organization, whatever you're selling, you're focused on doing that, and you've got limited bandwidth. So the question is sort of how do you get their attention?
Right?
Right? You get their attention by one of two ways. You bring them business by sharing leads, which is actually by far the best way.
Yep.
Sometimes in order to sort of drive incremental attention, spiffs in the beginning can be good catalysts, but they tend to be very short-lived.
Yeah.
Aaron,
yeah, I would say exactly right, because if your partnership is actually working, then both sides make money when you're working together, and you don't need any additional artificial sort of stimulus, right? Like our sales rep knows that if they bring MobileIron into the conversation, that's going to actually improve our chances of winning that deal, and potentially vice versa.
Yep.
And so the sales rep will actually just hit their quota because of that, as opposed to needing any additional comp. So I think usually if you're finding yourself having to do spiffs, it's some kind of artificial, you need to create. But in the beginning, it might help because it gets their attention before you have the organic sort of successes emerge.
Yeah, and then there's another version of that a lot of entrepreneurs think. They're like, well, I've got the world's best app for mobile on the MobileIron ecosystem or Box. I'm going to go to them and give them a 40% revenue share, and that's going to incent them to invest engineering or other resources in me because they're going to make a lot of money, right? Obviously, 99.9 times out of 100, it can't be material to your top line, right? But so any advice but it's a natural thing that founders think, right? I'm going to go in and I'm going to make this offer, right? Is there any magic way to do something on the economic side, or does it just not matter for a small ISV, small SaaS company?
I haven't really seen it matter.
Yeah.
Part of it's that you're focused on selling whatever you do, and sort of trying to stick some other revenue from somebody else in there gets kind of confusing. And in particular, if it's relatively small, it's sort of not worth the effort. And the reality is, at the end of the day, it goes back to the two things Aaron and I mentioned, which is driving sales traction and driving leads. So we haven't seen it really be, revenue shares be sort of an effective foundational element of an ecosystem partner model.
Well, let me flip it around, and you know.
I don't know, Aaron, what do you think?
Yeah, I would actually.
Can I get anyone's attention at Box by promising them half the revenue of my really cool app that runs on the Box platform, right? That I've already built on the Box platform, right?
Yeah, I mean that would have to be some kind of side dealing, I guess.
But does it work? Does it get people's attention?
No, the thing that gets people's attention is the ability to accelerate a deal or deliver something more transformational, which is why we realize we can't actually just generically look at our ecosystem as the ecosystem. We have to say, here are our healthcare partners, here are our financial services partners, here are the partners that help with sales teams and with marketing teams, and then that actually then becomes an offshoot of our own product. So if we can have things that become an offshoot of our product, then that actually just helps us sell a better solution to the customer, which makes our company more successful, and then by extension, hopefully makes a startup more successful as well.
Yeah. Let me ask another tactical variant of it. Let's say there's obviously, with any ecosystem, there's a handful of partners that are the most important at any given time to driving deals, right? It's just natural. It's a power law, right? If I've got the next greatest version of that partner, and I've built it, and it's amazing, right? How should I be worried about that incumbent relationship with MobileIron and Box? Should I ignore it? Can I displace them? How do I think about that seemingly tight relationship they already have with the partner? Because there's another thing founders worry about, right? I can never break in, right?
At least in my experience, the ecosystems tend to be fairly dynamic over time. So I'm not sure sort of that level of paranoia about having that conversation is justified. I would just have the conversation and see how it goes.
Yeah. Or put differently, as a founder, don't worry about it, right?
I'd have the conversation.
Yeah.
The ecosystems are, by definition, more than one thing. So the reality is the market eventually decides. So if your product and your service and your sales traction's there, we'd be excited to work with you.
Yeah. So a little bit more on the revenue, and I mean, obviously MobileIron is even bigger success in Airspace. You talked about Airspace's revenue ramp. So Bob, maybe help us, tell us about maybe, one or two key hires or accelerants that you did on the sales and revenue side that made MobileIron. What was a key moment or key hire?
Wow, there's some really interesting key hires in the early days of MobileIron. Some were obvious, some were not obvious. And they're sort of in the early days of MobileIron, one of them, and this is general for all companies, is make sure you spend the first little bit of getting your product to market, spend a lot of time with customers before you gas up and build a big sales organization. Because you are going to learn a ton from that first 3 or 4 months of interacting with customers on sales calls. And one of the things that we actually did by accident, but in retrospect actually turned to work out really well, is that we didn't actually hire a VP of sales out of the chute. And I think that's one of the mistakes most companies make is, okay, we got sales, let's go hire a VP of sales.
Yep.
The reality is a really good VP of sales won't work for you until you've got a couple salespeople that are actually showing they can sell stuff.
Yep, that's a big theme of ours.
Yep. So we sort of backed into this by accident. We hired sort of an early director of sales and a sales engineer and an inside salesperson just to go learn, go figure this out. And one of the key lessons out of that was hire those first two sort of creative sales types to go figure it out because they're part sales, part company learning. Yeah. And out of that, we developed what was called our sales playbook. And that is absolutely critical. It ended up being a little whiteboard in our inside sales bullpen, where as we're trying to pitch what we do, it's like, here's what worked, here's what didn't work, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. And this accumulated over the course of a couple months into essentially what became our sales playbook, that then as we added people, there's like, hey, look, here's how you learn what to go do next. Hey, product team, here's what's working, here's what's not working. Marketing team, here's what messaging sticking, not sticking. And then that became the vehicle to then, once you get enough momentum there, then you can hire a good VP of sales.
Yeah. No, hiring the VP of sales too early is about 8 out of 10 of us make that mistake, right?
Right.
Pretty,
Well,
did you
the
make
reality
the
is
mistake,
the really
Aaron?
good ones won't be the first one in the door.
100 other mistakes, but you avoided that one?
That was the one where we got the 2 out of 10.
The 2 out of 10? Yeah, good. You know.
Oh, actually, I have one other key early hire, by the way.
Tell us about the key
This is,
early hire. So the sales one's a good story. It's a good anecdote on the one.
This is one of the other things that often doesn't get talked about in the very beginning, kicking off a company, is your culture. That there's 2 ways company cultures can evolve.
Yep.
One is you can sort of be organic and just sort of let it evolve, and that's totally fine. Or you can actually sit down ahead of time and think and say, what is the type of culture we want to build as a company? What do we want to be about? What type of people do we want to work with? And we followed that model, which is the very first meeting we had as a company was sit down and write down what type of culture do we want to be and how do we want to work together and what's important to us. And so in the spirit of early stage key hires, particularly associated with culture, is one you would not expect. It's actually your office manager.
Good call.
Which is, if you think about it, the early days, you might have 2 or 3 engineers, like a product person, CEO, maybe a salesperson. Like, you're all trying to figure out what to do. The person who ends up, interestingly, helping really dictate sort of the early culture, dictate's the wrong word, sort of influence the culture in the early days, not just the CEO and the early founders, but your office manager.
Yeah.
Because they become sort of the company mom or company dad that helps take care of everybody and sort of is the glue. And so the personality and demeanor of your office manager has a huge impact on what your company starts to feel like in the early days. So that's the one you wouldn't think of.
Do you know of any good like sales-oriented office managers? they just walk around the sales floor like, why aren't you selling more? And I'll go fix the fridge.
Yeah, or I mean, really, every team should have an assistant too, as early as possible. I mean, the last thing you want is your engineer staying home to fix the cable when they could be writing code, or your sales guy. So.
Oh yeah.
Just two things I want to just dig on when I had Bob in mobile specifically, but a while back, I think when Box was about 100 million or getting there, maybe 80, Aaron and I met and we talked about seeing 10x a little bit. What you won't remember, but seeing $1 billion. I think you can just, in most recurring revenue businesses, if you squint, you can just about see 10x on the horizon, right? You're in such an agile space with so many boulders. How far can you see in mobile? Because it's just, I mean, this world changes so much, right?
So.
Can you see 10x?
Absolutely.
Can you?
And just to give you a sense, I mean, I often joke that it's really second inning of a 9-inning ball game in mobile, and I really do believe that. And just sort of put that in perspective.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at smartphones and tablets in the workplace, there's somewhere between 400 and 500 million of them right now.
Yep.
And that over the next 3 years is growing to 900 million to 1 billion new smartphones and tablets. Even at a relatively small attach rate, at a reasonable pricing assumption, you can very quickly get to a $500 million a year, $1 billion a year, many billion-dollar a year company. Because it's really, we're still early stages.
You just need a 1 or 2% attach rate to do that,
we are
right?
in it's really second inning of a 9-inning game. And just even put that, like BlackBerry at the peak of their game, was it like 22 million devices? That was it in the enterprise, right? I mean, and our space is 400 million going to 900 million. Like, this is an absolutely monster market.
Yeah. All right, well, I won't ask you to tell us what MobileIron looks like at $1 billion plus in revenue, but the answer is you can see it, right? That's what I'm always curious about, right?
Amen.
So one question I wanted on the revenue side too, when Aaron and I chatted earlier, you might not have heard it, but he talked about, it was really only maybe in the last 18 to 24 months that they had real CIO level discussions at Box, right? Going up from department on up. At MobileIron, I assume it's almost from the very beginning, right?
In the first 2 years, not so much, but I would say since 2012.
2012?
Mobile's become a CIO level conversation.
Yeah.
And how it's correlated is if you look at mobile's a journey, right? In the early days, it's like, oh, look, I want device choice and email. But then it becomes about applications, content, identity. Mobile becoming a full productivity platform. That is a CIO level care about, and actually arguably a CEO level care about.
Yeah.
So since 2012, as sort of the enterprise IT industry and just all of us as people with jobs inside companies have realized that mobile's now strategic, mobile's absolutely a CIO level conversation. Now, what's interesting is there are sort of two classes of CEOs out there. There are the ones that sort of come from the classic infrastructure, sort of lock things down, closed stack view of the world.
Yep.
And there's the other ones that are much more, how do I enable my users with productivity? How do I deliver great services? While at the same time making sure my enterprise data is secure. They're really much more of a technology strategic business partner to the business. For those types of CIOs, mobile's absolutely on their top 3 list.
Yeah. So if I'm 2 years in or less and I want to sell to a CIO, it's not like MobileIron's gone public and has hit some, and how do I convince the CIO to take a risk on me?
The biggest thing with CIOs and taking risks is other good customer references.
For sure. Yeah.
So this is sort of the chicken and the egg problem in an early stage, right? Is you got to get your first couple sort of large enterprise wins, and you might get those wins at sort of the VP or director level, and you earn your street credibility, so then that CIO says something good about you.
Yeah.
At that point, you have credibility with the next CIO and the next CIO after that. Because very few CIOs will ever bet on an early stage company without talking to somebody who's tried it. So you need to get those early referenceable customers. You know, one of the key milestones in the early stage of a company is, you know, when do you get to 5 large referenceable enterprise customers? At that point, you've got sort of the core crucible to then daisy chain into other customers and really have that conversation on a regular basis.
Yeah. And what would you say to startups that want to penetrate the CIO's office, right? What's the advice? How do you get in there, right? I mean, Aaron did it more organically, actually, than I even realized, right, over time, right? But you've got MobileIron, you know, to make it, you've got to penetrate the CIO's office relatively early. So what's your advice, right? If you haven't lived it, right? You've got a lot of experience selling to the enterprise and working with the enterprise, right? Because there's no magic here, right? The CIO does buy stuff.
CIO does buy stuff.
They buy a lot of stuff, right? So as impenetrable as it can seem, it's actually quite penetrable if you know what you're doing, right?
Yes, and in the early days, honestly, it's just banging the phones and banging on doors. And you know, the thing is, try and find the CIOs that tend to be more progressive, have a track record of working with early stage companies. You know, like actually I was meeting with CIO of one of our joint customers yesterday for breakfast, and there are progressive CIOs that actually want to be known as the people who find the next great piece of the technology stack together. And they tend to run together, actually. So in some cases, ask companies like us or Box about who are some of the early CIOs that were willing to take those bets. Those are the companies where, believe it or not, actually a cold call to that CIO actually can be successful, or a reference through another company can be successful.
Google the craziest startup you can think of, and then with the word CIO in it, and see what names show up, and then call all those CIOs.
And so I think the corollary of that for those that aren't classically trained in outbound is don't be discouraged, right? Because you're going to have a low hit rate with that approach, right? If you don't know who the innovators are, you're going to have a low hit rate, right?
Yeah, and you know, there's like, for instance, in the Valley, there's a network of CIOs that is a fairly progressive group, and you know, they network, they talk to each other. You get one of them, you quickly get an audience with 2. But the trick is you got to make sure that first one's successful. So that's the advice there. And don't be discouraged. I mean, look, we're a public company, you know, lots of people, lots of customers. I actually spend probably an hour and a half a week doing CIO cold calls.
That's interesting.
And the reality is that it's part of your job as the CEO to reach out to the executives of your customers and your prospects.
You don't have any SDRs helping you out? It's literally Bob picking up the phone?
I pick up the phone or send emails. Now, they're targeted, right? It's prospects. It's like, who are we working on, or who's a customer where we haven't yet talked to the CIO and I want to build a relationship. Just pick up the phone and call, reach out. And you know, that's the way it starts. Don't be discouraged.
And related to that, I asked Aaron the question, but curious, how much, now that MobileIron's really at scale, how much of your time are you able to spend both with existing customers and then, as you touched on, with prospects? And how much time should we spend with both, right?
Wow, at our stage or at
Well, you can pick any stage that you like, but it's how much time as CEOs, as founders, should we be spending with prospects, and because it's a long-term relationship with existing customers, right? And how much of your time do you spend on those?
Boy, that's a tricky balance. I'd say it ebbs and flows over time. I don't have a particular rule on that. You know, in the early stage, when you're going after your first 20 customers, you're all about the prospects. You win your first 20 customers, then you're working your damnedest to make sure they're successful.
Yeah.
So it sort of ebbs and flows depending on what time you're in. I'd say if I look at my time, it's probably 50-50 between
50-50.
prospects and existing
Jason
customers.
has some really hard rules about this, apparently. So.
Really?
He says, don't spend time with new customers, new prospects.
I think we just, as founders, we're naturally biased to want to close deals, right? And sometimes we don't get on a plane enough and go out to wherever it is, Round Rock or Pensacola, and hang out with the customer that we already closed, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you go over-rotate 100% on new customers, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Particularly, I mean, if you look at our business, right, it's a huge land and expand business. When the customer starts, they're this big, and then
sales
they grow
is just
to
a
be
little
this big.
tiny piece of the
Right,
journey, right?
absolutely. The long-term value of your customer relationships is absolutely driven by your ability to expand, upsell, and retain them over time.
Yeah.
And that requires time and focus. And it's not just you as CEO, it's the product team, the support team. Making your customer successful is actually one of the highest ROIs you can have in your business.
Cool. Well, thanks for the time to both of you. Anything we didn't catch that either of you wanted to bring up?
There's so much more.
So much more? All right, very good. All right, let's thank Bob Tinker and also Aaron for staying, which was terrific. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks, man. It was great.
Pleasure.
Yeah.